Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Neil Ashford had always believed numbers don't lie. In 22 years working as a senior accountant in Phoenix, Arizona, he'd built his entire career on that premise. Balance sheets, income statements, tax returns, everything could be verified, cross-checked, audited. Numbers told stories people tried to hide, and Neil had a special talent for reading between the lines of spreadsheets. What he never imagined was that he'd one day need to apply that skill to his own life. At 44, Neil was living what he considered a comfortable existence. The house in the Scottsdale suburbs had been paid off 3 years earlier. His retirement fund was on track. His 2 children from his first marriage were already adults, living in other states but staying in regular contact. And Justine, his wife of 16 years, seemed like the perfect partner for the second half of his life. She managed a women's clothing boutique downtown in Phoenix, a poised, elegant 41-year-old woman who always knew how to dress and carry herself with a sophistication Neil admired. They'd met at a business conference when Neil was consulting for small businesses and Justine was opening her first store. They married 2 years later in an intimate ceremony in Sedona, overlooking the red rock formations that Justine loved so much. Sedona. How that city would come to mean something entirely different in their story. That Tuesday night, Neil was alone at home. Justine had left 3 days earlier for one of her monthly buying trips to Los Angeles. It was a routine established years ago. She'd visit showrooms, negotiate with suppliers, and bring back exclusive pieces for the boutique. Neil had never questioned it. Why would he? Trust, after all, was the foundation of any marriage. He was in the living room reviewing a client's tax documents when the doorbell rang. The clock read exactly 11:07 p.m. Neil frowned. Deliveries at this hour were unusual, especially in this residential neighborhood where most neighbors were already asleep. He got up from the couch, adjusted his reading glasses, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a young man in uniform holding something bulky. Neil opened the door and was greeted by an elaborate arrangement of yellow tulips, so large it nearly hid the courier's face. The young man seemed embarrassed by the late hour. "Delivery for Justine Ashford," he said, holding out an electronic clipboard for Neil to sign. Neil hesitated for a moment. Justine wasn't home. Flowers delivered at nearly midnight for a woman who was supposedly 600 miles away. Something about that equation didn't add up. But he signed anyway, thanked the courier, and carried the arrangement inside. The tulips were of exceptional quality. Neil didn't know much about flowers, but he could recognize expensive when he saw it. Nestled among the stems was a golden envelope. He set the vase on the dining table and stared at that envelope for nearly a full minute. Opening someone else's mail was wrong. He knew that. In 16 years of marriage, he'd never once violated Justine's privacy. But 16 years of marriage should also mean there were no secrets. And flowers delivered almost at midnight to a woman supposedly hundreds of miles away demanded an explanation. Neil opened the envelope. The card had golden edges and textured, high-quality paper. The handwriting was masculine, slanted right, in navy blue ink. The words hit Neil like slow-motion bullets. "Mi amor, every moment away from you feels like an eternity. Come back soon to your Diego's arms. I'll be waiting where we always are. Mi amor. Diego. Where we always are." Neil read it 3 times, then a 4th. Each reading brought a fresh wave of nausea. He didn't know any Diego. And, "where we always are," suggested a familiar place, a pattern, a routine of meetings. This wasn't a message from someone who'd just met Justine. It was intimate. Established. An ongoing affair. Neil sank heavily into a dining chair, the card still in his hands. The yellow tulips seemed to mock him with their vibrant cheerfulness. He thought about calling Justine right away, confronting her over the phone, demanding answers. But something held him back. Maybe it was the accountant in him, the professional who knew accusations without proof were easily dismissed. Maybe it was wounded pride that wanted irrefutable evidence before any confrontation. Or maybe it was simply the fear of hearing confirmation of what he already suspected. Neil wasn't a tech-savvy man. He used his computer for work, his phone for basic calls and texts, and avoided social media the way he avoided processed food. But that night, necessity became his teacher. He went to the home office and turned on the family's shared computer. He remembered that years ago, they'd set up a family phone plan that included shared location tracking, a security measure Justine herself had suggested at the time. Ironic, Neil thought bitterly, as he opened the app. Justine's phone location history was right there, logged day after day, week after week. And what Neil saw made his stomach turn. Justine wasn't in Los Angeles. GPS showed that for the past 3 days, she'd been staying at a resort in Sedona, just 2 hours from Phoenix. 2 hours from home. Neil zoomed in on the map, checked the dates, cross-referenced the data. The pattern was undeniable. For the past 8 months, every shopping trip to Los Angeles had coincided with stays at that same resort in Sedona. 3 days a month. Always the same place. Always lying about her destination. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when Neil finally stepped away from the computer. His eyes burned, but not from fatigue. He'd spent hours digging through records, old emails, and joint bank statements they could access together. The joint account didn't show anything suspicious, Justine was careful. But Neil was an accountant. He knew money always leaves traces. And it was in the details that he found his first concrete clue. A credit card statement arriving by mail for months, always addressed to Justine, always taken by her before Neil could see it. He'd never paid attention before. Now, he needed to find that statement. The next morning, Neil called the bank. He identified himself as Justine Ashford's husband and, using personal details he knew by heart after years of filing joint tax returns, gained access to the statement of a secondary credit card he hadn't even known existed. What he saw left him breathless. Over $40,000 in expenses over the past 2 years. Gifts from jewelry stores. Designer men's clothing. Reservations at the Sedona resort, always the same room, 412. Expensive dinners at upscale restaurants. And, more disturbingly, monthly transfers to a bank account Neil didn't recognize. Around $800 a month, regularly, for nearly a year. She was supporting someone. This Diego, whoever he was partly living off money Neil thought was going toward their retirement. Neil spent the rest of that morning in a state of calculated shock. The emotional part of him wanted to scream, break things, drive to Sedona and confront Justine right then and there. But the rational part, the same part that had built a solid career, knew he needed more. He needed to know who Diego was. He needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal. And he needed evidence an attorney could actually use. Arizona was a community property state. Without proper documentation, Justine could walk away from the marriage with half of everything, including the money she herself had diverted. Neil wouldn't allow that. He started researching. The Sedona resort had a website with staff photos. And there he was, smiling in a professional headshot, Diego Varela, personal trainer and outdoor activities instructor. 30 years old, maybe younger. Tanned, muscular, with a smile Neil imagined directed at his wife. Anger rose inside him, but Neil held it in check. Anger without strategy was wasted energy. On Wednesday night, Neil made his decision. He wouldn't wait for Justine to return. He wouldn't confront her over the phone. He'd go to Sedona himself. See it with his own eyes. Document everything. On Thursday morning, he told his office he had a personal emergency and hit the road. The 2-hour drive felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Each mile brought new thoughts, memories of their wedding, of the day they met, of their honeymoon, of promises made, of lies he now realized had been woven through months, maybe years. When he reached Sedona, it was nearly 11 a.m. The resort was luxurious, more luxurious than any place Neil and Justine had stayed together. He parked at a safe distance and watched. Justine's car was there, parked near the main entrance. The visual confirmation hurt more than he'd expected. Part of him still wished he was wrong. Neil walked into the lobby with measured steps. He wore casual clothes, nothing that would draw attention. He sat in an armchair with a clear view of the elevators and waited. His heart pounded, but his hands stayed steady. At 11:23 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Justine stepped out first. She wore a light dress, heeled sandals, and a designer handbag Neil had never seen before. Behind her, holding her hand, was Diego Varela. He looked even younger in person. They were laughing about something, intimate, comfortable with each other in a way Neil hadn't seen in Justine for years. The scene was so ordinary, so casually domestic, that Neil could almost imagine they were the real couple. And maybe, for Justine, they were. Neil stood up. He walked toward them without hurry. Justine didn't see him right away, she was too busy looking at Diego, touching his arm as she spoke. It was Diego who noticed Neil first. His smile faltered as he saw the middle-aged man approaching with clear intent. Justine followed his gaze, and when she recognized her husband, her face went through a transformation Neil would never forget: surprise, horror, panic, then a desperate attempt to regain composure. "Neil? What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled despite her effort to sound normal. Neil stopped less than 6 feet from the couple. With absolute calm, he pulled his phone from his pocket and took a photo of them together. The flash wasn't needed in the daylight, but the gesture was deliberate. "Yellow tulips arrived the night before last," Neil said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Nice card, Diego. Mi amor. Very romantic." Diego dropped Justine's hand as if it burned him. His eyes darted between them, trying to assess the situation. "Senor, I didn't, this isn't, you didn't what?" Neil interrupted, still calm. "You haven't been sleeping with my wife for months? Haven't been getting $800 a month from her account? Haven't been wearing the designer clothes she buys with our joint money?" Justine tried to step in. "Neil, please, can we talk in private? This isn't what it looks like." Neil let out a dry, humorless laugh. "It isn't what it looks like. Interesting. Then explain it to me, Justine. Explain the 8 months of LA shopping trips that were actually stays here. Explain the 40 grand on a secret credit card. Explain the monthly transfers to your personal trainer's bank account." Each word was a precise strike. Neil had rehearsed this mentally for hours, but his own calm surprised even him. The anger was there, boiling just beneath the surface, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. Justine paled with every revelation. "How did you invaded my privacy." "Privacy?" Neil repeated, his voice finally gaining a sharp edge. "You want to talk about privacy? You've been cheating on me for months. Diverting money from our future. Lying straight to my face every time you packed your bags for your shopping trips. And you want to talk about privacy?" Diego took a step back, clearly wanting no part of this situation. "Look, man, I didn't know what?" Neil turned to him. "Didn't know she was married? Her wedding ring didn't tip you off? Or didn't you know she was paying to be with you? Because the bank statements suggest a very specific kind of arrangement." The comment hit Diego where it hurt. His posture shifted, defensive now. "I'm not, you're not what?" "Because numbers don't lie, Diego. She gives you $800 a month. Buys you clothes. Pays for the hotel. That sounds less like love and more like a transaction." Justine tried again. "Neil, for God's sake, stop this. People are staring. Indeed, a few guests and staff were watching the scene with poorly concealed curiosity. Neil glanced around, noted the audience, and decided he didn't care. Let them look, Justine. Let them see. You didn't care about our reputation when you decided to have an affair. Why should I care now? He turned back to Diego, who looked ready to bolt. Just so you know, Diego, I've already spoken to a lawyer. And when the divorce is finalized, those monthly payments will stop. Along with the gifts. And the resort stays. You'll need to find another client. The word was chosen deliberately. Diego finally snapped. I'm not we have something real, man. Justine and I, we love each other. Neil looked at Justine, waiting. She said nothing. Didn't defend their relationship. Didn't confirm the love. Her silence was more eloquent than any words. Neil almost felt sorry for Diego. Almost. Did she ever tell you she loves you, Diego? Even once? The silence stretched. Diego looked at Justine, waiting. She looked away. Justine? Diego pressed, his voice losing confidence. Tell him. Diego, it's not that simple, she began. Not simple. Diego repeated, realization finally dawning. You told me you'd file for divorce. That we'd be together. That you just needed more time. Neil watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. The betrayal had more layers than he'd imagined. Justine wasn't just cheating on him, she was lying to Diego too, promising a future she likely never intended to fulfill. She wanted both, the comfort and security of marriage with Neil, and the excitement and passion with Diego. And she'd been willing to pay, literally, to keep both worlds running. Looks like she lied to both of us, Neil said, surprising himself with the observation. At least we have that in common. Diego shook his head, his expression shifting between anger and humiliation. Without another word, he turned and quickly walked toward the elevators. Justine made a move to follow him, but Neil stopped her with a single sentence. If you go after him now, don't bother coming home. Your things will be on the sidewalk. She froze. For a moment, Neil thought she'd choose Diego anyway. But then her shoulders slumped, her sophisticated facade crumbling completely. Justine suddenly looked smaller, older, more fragile than he'd ever seen her. Neil. I can explain. I was unhappy. You're never home, always working, and I felt so alone, and Diego showed up, and, you were unhappy. Neil repeated slowly. So your solution was to steal $40,000 from our future to fund an affair with a personal trainer 15 years younger. Instead of, I don't know, talking to me. Suggesting couples therapy. Filing for divorce honestly. You chose to lie. 4 months. Justine had no reply. For the first time in 16 years, Neil saw his wife completely speechless. No excuses. No justifications. Just the weight of truth finally exposed. He pulled an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket, divorce papers, prepared by his attorney in the last 48 hours. Sign when you're ready. My lawyer will contact yours to discuss property division. And, Justine? Those $40,000 will be discussed too. Marital asset dissipation is taken very seriously in Arizona. He placed the papers in her hand and started to walk away. Neil, wait. Her voice was thick with emotion. 16 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He stopped, but didn't turn. It meant everything to me, Justine. Every single day of those 16 years. That's why it hurts so much to learn that, apparently, it didn't mean enough to you. The divorce process took 5 months. It wasn't fast, Arizona required a waiting period, but it was final. Neil's attorney presented bank statements, evidence of the transfers, and full documentation of the marital asset dissipation. Justine initially tried to contest it, claiming the money was hers and she had the right to spend it as she pleased. But when the judge saw the scale of the hidden expenses and the systematic lies, the decision was clear. Justine was ordered to reimburse Neil for the diverted funds, a monthly payment that would last for years. The house was sold and the proceeds split, but Justine's share was significantly reduced to cover the restitution owed. Neil kept his retirement investments intact, as it was proven Justine had jeopardized her portion through irresponsible spending. The clothing boutique turned out to be another disaster. When Justine's business partner, a woman named Patricia, discovered the full extent of the affair, she conducted her own audit. She found that Justine had borrowed over $15,000 from the store's cash register over the past year, money never repaid. Patricia immediately dissolved the partnership and threatened legal action. Justine ended up selling her share of the business for a fraction of its real value, just to avoid further legal trouble. And Diego? Diego disappeared 3 weeks after the confrontation at the resort. When Justine's monthly payments stopped, Neil had frozen their joint accounts the day after their encounter. The personal trainer lost interest fast. Justine tried contacting him several times, Neil later learned through his attorney, but Diego had blocked her number and apparently quit his job at the resort. The last known information was that he'd moved to California. The eternal love promised in the tulip card had lasted exactly until the money ran out. 8 months after the confrontation in Sedona, Neil was in a different place. Not just physically, he'd moved into a modern downtown Phoenix apartment with a view of the surrounding mountains, but emotionally too. The first few months had been tough. Anger gave way to grief, which gave way to a weary kind of acceptance. He'd loved Justine, genuinely. Discovering her betrayal didn't erase 16 years of shared memories. But the lies, the cold financial scheme, her willingness to jeopardize their future for an affair that he couldn't forgive. And he wouldn't try. He was at his office that Friday afternoon when he got a message from his attorney. Justine's final restitution payment had arrived. Late, as always, but complete. Neil looked at the numbers on his screen, just numbers, as they'd always been for him, and felt something unexpected, indifference. That chapter was closed. That night, Neil had dinner plans. Caroline, a financial analyst who worked in the same office building, had suggested they share a glass of wine. It wasn't exactly a date, or maybe it was. Neil was still relearning how to navigate these waters. But it was a beginning. A possibility. Something he couldn't have imagined 8 months earlier. As he got ready, Neil thought about Justine. The last he'd heard, she was living with her parents in Tucson, working as a department store salesperson. The sophisticated boutique manager, the woman who only wore designer clothes, was now selling generic merchandise on commission. It wasn't revenge Neil felt at the thought. Just the simple realization that choices have consequences. Numbers don't lie, and eventually the bills always come due. He left his apartment at 7 p.m. The evening was pleasant, typical Phoenix spring weather. On his way to the restaurant, he passed a flower shop. In the window, an arrangement of yellow tulips caught his eye. Neil paused for a moment, looking at the flowers that had changed his life. Then, for the first time in months, he genuinely smiled. He kept walking, leaving the tulips behind. Some flowers were simply too beautiful to keep. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.